September 17, 1862. Antietam, Maryland. The bloodiest single day in American history. 23,000 casualties. The ground is soaked with blood. A 40-year-old woman arrives on the battlefield. Not behind the lines at a field hospital, but on the actual battlefield while bullets are still flying. She ordered the drivers of her supply wagons to follow the cannon and traveled all night, actually pulling ahead of military medical units. She has no formal medical training, no official position, no military authorization to be here, just wagons full of supplies she personally collected and a determination that soldiers shouldn't die for lack of bandages. At the Battle of Antietam, Barton used corn husks in place of bandages when supplies ran out. A bullet tore through her sleeve, killing the man she was tending. She didn't flinch. She kept working. They would call her the angel of the battlefield. But Clara Barton was no angel. She was something far more remarkable. She was a woman who refused every limitation society placed on her, who fought bureaucracy as fiercely as she fought death, and who created the American Red Cross despite being told repeatedly that women couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. She lived 90 years in an era when women's life expectancy was 56. She never married, never had children, and spent her entire life in service to others, on her own terms, defying every convention. This is Clara Barton's story, not just the Red Cross founder, but the teacher who quit when a man was paid more, the federal employee fired for her abolitionism, the Civil War nurse who defied military orders, the suffragist who fought for women's rights, and the autocratic leader who refused to surrender control even when forced out at age 83. Born December 25, 1821, in North Oxford, Massachusetts, Clara Barton was the fifth child of Stephen and Sarah Barton. Christmas Day. The baby of the family by a significant margin, her siblings were much older. Her family directed their painfully shy daughter to become a teacher upon the recommendation of renowned phrenologist Ellen Fowler, who examined her as a girl. Phrenology, reading personality from skull bumps, was pseudoscience, but the career advice proved sound. As a teenager, Barton helped care for her seriously ill brother David, her first experience as a nurse. For 2 years, she nursed him back to health when doctors had given up. This early experience taught her that determination could overcome expert opinion. She began teaching at age 18, founded a school for workers' children at her brother's mill when she was 24, and proved to be an excellent educator despite her shyness. In 1852 in Bordentown, New Jersey, she established a free school that soon became so large that the townsmen would no longer allow a woman to run it. Rather than subordinate herself to a male principal, Barton resigned. Read that again. She built a successful school from nothing. It grew so large it needed more staff. The town hired a man to run it at twice her salary and expected her to work under him. She quit. "I will never work for less than a man," she said. This was 1852. Women were expected to accept whatever pay and position they were offered. Clara refused. She was then employed by the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C., from 1854 to 1857 and again in 1860. She was one of the first women to work for the federal government. This was revolutionary. Federal employment was a male domain. Clara not only got the job, but did it well enough to be rehired after being let go. She was very unpopular amongst her co-workers. Her unpopularity was not only for working in a government job as a woman, but also for her outspoken abolitionism, which eventually got her fired in 1857. She didn't just work quietly and try to fit in. She spoke out against slavery, loudly, publicly, defiantly, until they fired her for it. When the Civil War began in 1861, Clara Barton was 39 years old, unmarried, living alone in Washington, D.C., working as a clerk. Society saw her as a spinster, a woman who'd failed at a woman's primary job, marriage and motherhood. But Clara was about to show them what a failure could accomplish. On April 19, 1861, the Baltimore riot resulted in the first bloodshed of the American Civil War. The victims, members of the 6th Massachusetts Militia, were transported to the unfinished Capitol building in Washington, D.C., where Barton lived. Wanting to serve her country, Barton went to the railroad station when the victims arrived and nursed 40 men. Barton quickly recognized them, as she had grown up with some of them and even taught some. These were her former students, boys she'd taught, now wounded soldiers. She couldn't just watch. She gathered supplies, her own money, donations she solicited, whatever she could find, and brought them to the soldiers. Food, clothing, bandages, comfort. This became her mission. In August 1862, Barton finally gained permission from Quartermaster Daniel Rucker to work on the front lines. Finally, it took over a year of fighting bureaucracy, pulling strings, leveraging connections to get official permission to do what she'd already been doing unofficially. Initially, Barton's help was often declined, as no woman had ever appeared directly on the battlefield, in camps, or in field hospitals. However, she gained the trust of military officials and Lincoln over time. The military didn't want her. Women belonged in hospitals far behind the lines, if involved at all. Battlefields were for men. Clara went to battlefields anyway. It was Barton who bought most of her supplies and paid for their transportation to and around battlefields. She was, however, later reimbursed by Congress and supplemented with money from donations. She funded this herself initially, her own savings, money she raised through appeals to Massachusetts newspapers and personal connections. She wasn't waiting for official approval or government funding. Soldiers were dying now. She worked to distribute stores, clean field hospitals, apply dressings, and serve food to wounded soldiers in close proximity to several battles, including Cedar Mountain, Second Bull Run, Antietam, and Fredericksburg. Barton helped both Union and Confederate soldiers. Union and Confederate. She didn't distinguish. A wounded man was a wounded man. While the battle raged, she and her associates dashed about bringing relief and hope to the field. She nursed, comforted, and cooked for the wounded. In the face of danger, she wrote, "I always tried to succor the wounded until medical aid and supplies could come up. I could run the risk. It made no difference to anyone if I were shot or taken prisoner. It made no difference to anyone if I were shot." She understood her value in society's eyes. A spinster, no husband, no children, no one depending on her. She could take risks men with families couldn't. When the war ended, Clara found new ways to help the military. With permission from President Lincoln, she opened the Office of Missing Soldiers, helping to reconnect more than 20,000 soldiers with their families. She established a Bureau of Records and answered over 63,000 letters and identified over 22,000 missing men. After 4 years of war, thousands of families had no idea what happened to their sons, husbands, fathers. Were they dead? Prisoners? Deserted? Clara created a system to find answers. After helping to identify nearly 13,000 Union soldier graves at the Andersonville prisoner of war camp, Clara was chosen to raise the U.S. flag when the site was dedicated as a national cemetery in 1865. Andersonville, the notorious Confederate prison where thousands of Union soldiers died of disease, starvation, exposure. Clara helped identify their graves, giving families closure. During a trip to Switzerland in 1869, Clara learned about the Red Cross movement, a European humanitarian effort to provide neutral aid to those injured in combat. She'd gone to Europe to rest. She'd worked herself into exhaustion during and after the war. But when the Franco-Prussian War broke out, Clara couldn't rest. The Franco-German War broke out, and Barton again distributed relief supplies to war victims. In Europe, she became associated with the International Red Cross. She worked with the International Red Cross during the war, learning their methods, understanding their mission. And she realized America needs this. After her return to the United States in 1873, she campaigned vigorously and successfully for that country to sign the Geneva Convention. For years, Clara lobbied presidents, Congress, the State Department. The United States should join the Geneva Convention, should establish an American Red Cross. They resisted. America didn't need it. We weren't planning to fight wars on American soil. The Geneva Convention was a European concern. Clara persisted. On May 21, 1881, Clara founded the American Red Cross, and by 1882, the U.S. ratified the Geneva Conventions. She was nearly 60 years old. Most women her age in that era were grandmothers, retired from active life. Clara was just getting started on her greatest work. Clara's innovations with the American Red Cross inspired the Red Cross International Conference to adopt the American Amendment in 1884, enabling the global Red Cross network to provide peacetime disaster relief. This was Clara's innovation. The Red Cross shouldn't just help war victims. It should respond to natural disasters, fires, floods, any crisis where people needed help. She convinced the International Red Cross to adopt this. An American woman, operating an American organization for less than 3 years, changed international humanitarian policy. Domestically in 1884, she helped in the floods on the Ohio River, provided Texas with food and supplies during the famine of 1887, took workers to Illinois in 1888 after a tornado, and that same year took workers to Florida for the yellow fever epidemic. Within days after the Johnstown flood in 1889, she led her delegation of 50 doctors and nurses in response. In 1896, responding to the humanitarian crisis in the Ottoman Empire of the Hamidian massacres, Barton arrived in Constantinople February 15th. At age 75, Clara went to Turkey to provide aid to Armenian massacre victims. 75 years old, traveling to a crisis zone in the Ottoman Empire. She was jealous of any interference, however, and supervised the organization's activities so closely that charges of authoritarianism were brought against her. Clara ran the Red Cross like her personal fiefdom. She made all decisions, controlled all operations, refused to delegate authority. This made her effective but also controversial. The Red Cross had been chartered by Congress in 1900, and the rebelling faction used that lever to force Barton's resignation in 1904. Internal conflicts came to a head. The Red Cross had grown too large for one person to control. Board members wanted more oversight, more accountability, more democratic governance. Clara resisted. This was her organization. She'd built it from nothing. She knew how to run it. Barton resigned from the American Red Cross in 1904 amid an internal power struggle and claims of financial mismanagement. While she was known to be an autocratic leader, she never took a salary for her work within the organization and sometimes used her funds to support relief efforts. Financial mismanagement claims, but she'd never taken a salary, had often used her own money. The mismanagement was refusing to surrender control. She was 83 years old. They forced her out of the organization she'd created. In 1904, she established the National First Aid Association of America, an organization that emphasized emergency preparedness and developed first aid kits. Forced out of the Red Cross at 83? Fine. She'd start another organization. The National First Aid Association taught basic first aid, created first aid kits, promoted emergency preparedness, all innovations that seem obvious now but were revolutionary then. After the war, Clara Barton shifted her efforts from promoting public health to women's rights. She was well acquainted with women's rights leaders like Susan B. Anthony, and shared her goals of promoting women's suffrage. Barton was a close friend of suffragist, writer, and lecturer Susan B. Anthony. Clara didn't just help soldiers and disaster victims. She fought for women's right to vote, to work, to have equal opportunities. She lived her advocacy, proving through her own life what women could accomplish. Clara spent her life providing service to others. Never married, nor had any children. By choice, she chose service over conventional domesticity. When Clara passed away at the age of 90, she far exceeded the average life expectancy for women in 1912, which was about 56 years. She died April 12, 1912, at her home in Glen Echo, Maryland. Her Glen Echo, Maryland home became a National Historic Site in 1974, the first dedicated to the achievements of a woman. Clara Barton lived 90 years and never stopped fighting. Fighting bureaucracy, fighting expectations, fighting for soldiers, for disaster victims, for women's rights, for her vision of humanitarian service. She was called the Angel of the Battlefield. But she was no angel. She was stubborn, autocratic, difficult, uncompromising. She refused to work for less than a man. She defied military orders. She controlled the Red Cross so tightly they had to force her out. And she changed the world. Today, the Red Cross provides emergency assistance globally. First aid kits are standard. Emergency preparedness is taught everywhere. Women work in every field, including combat nursing. None of this was inevitable, someone had to fight for it. Clara Barton fought for it. On battlefields while bullets flew. In Congress while politicians dismissed her. In boardrooms while men told her to step aside. She never stepped aside. She stepped forward into danger, into controversy, into history. Clara Barton. Teacher, clerk, battlefield nurse, founder, suffragist, autocrat, angel, warrior. She defied everyone and saved countless lives doing it.